My point last time in discussing judicial activism was not to grind against abortion. That is something which I don't expect everyone to agree on. We've talked occasionally about it in class, and you know that my answer is, in a divided society like ours, it should be a state's issue. That some states who have populations that are very pro-abortion, pro-choice, should have it legal, and those states that are majority pro-life or anti-abortion should not have it legal. And in effect, what that does is it allows people from pro-life states to travel and get abortions without necessarily the people in the states being involved. But no doubt that's an opinion that's going to irritate people on both sides, and that isn't the point. The point isn't abortion. The point is that judicial activism, in the case of the civil rights movement, did do something that politicians could not have done themselves, and they made the country a better place. But in the case of Roe v. Wade, they did something which is probably one of the baseline fractures that leads to the gulf between liberals and conservatives today. Because instead of appreciating that people on both sides have good intentions, liberals call conservatives people who want to bring women back into back alley doctors with clothes hanger abortions and all the horrors of that. Yes, because conservatives truly are evil and we hate women, even though many of us are women, and those of us who are men are often married to them. That's obviously nonsense. Fanatical nonsense. The same fanatical nonsense, though, exists on the pro-life side, or the conservative side, which assumes that everyone who is pro-choice is eager to kill as many babies as possible, and to have as many young women go through this dark sacrament of human sacrifice as possible. That's not true either. There are good people on both sides of this issue. We are human beings and we are fallible. Our wisdom is limited. Our capacity to do justice is limited. And if the abortion issue doesn't demonstrate that in spades, I don't know what will. The problem with it being a court decision is that suddenly it became legal everywhere, because the U.S. Supreme Court said it was constitutional and legal and it must be legal. And the political fight that should have happened and that needed to happen between pro-life and pro-choice didn't happen until after the fact. And that, I think, is one of the key moments that has poisoned our political dialogue and caused distrust, an existential, fundamental distrust and dislike between liberals and conservatives. I believe that liberals and conservatives need each other. I believe that without conservatives, liberals would take us off into an anarchic cloud cuckoo land of various woke ideologies and ultimately destroy freedom and turn us into a communist police state. That's my fear. I also believe that conservatives, without liberals, could tamp things down so tightly that no human being who had a creative bone in their body would be happy. And no scientific progress would happen, and social progress would be prevented by government action, and I wouldn't want that. But in a hyper-conservative world, I could see that happening, just as in a hyper-liberal world, I could see all sorts of bad unintended side effects. We need one another. In fact, what makes the United States and other free societies special is that we don't put our political enemies up against a wall and fill them full of lead. We talk and we listen and we tolerate each other. And you win some and you lose some, and you're still loyal to the system. But more and more people are comfortable being completely vile to the folk on the other side. And I think you can make your own decision. You have to make your own decision if you're going to have an opinion about this. I think that the Roe v. Wade decision is an example of judicial activism fracturing the political fabric, the political bedrock of this country. In any event, there is a fundamental problem with judicial activism, not just when it goes too far. Who do the judges think they are? Do they think they have a unique handle on right and wrong, on good and evil? Do these judges really think that they're above politics and that they have a clear understanding of what the society needs, that the lumpen proletariat, ignorant, stinking masses don't? That the dumb politicians that these stinking, ignorant masses elect don't? Do these judges genuinely believe that they have a unique insight into life, the universe, and everything just because they get to wear a black robe when they go to work? It is the height of hubris and arrogance for a self-appointed, limited oligarchy. Remember that word. The rule of an unaccountable small elite to decide that in a free society, they know best and everyone else had better listen to them. This is the terrible power. My beard is driving me crazy. This is the terrible power of the court system. The court system has more power than the president, more power than the Congress. The court system has the power to lock you up and call you a criminal and take your property and do all of those other things that involve the negation of rights. This is real power. And the people who are given it as stewards, not to be advocates, but to be protectors, not to be people who are interested in pushing a particular agenda, even if it's the bestest agenda ever. They're supposed to preserve the Constitution, not distort it. So you will see by that critique that I am in harmony with the strict constructivists. Strict constructivism is referencing the strict interpretation of the Constitution so that the Constitution means only what the founders say. And you are trying to interpret the founders' vision of freedom in the current circumstances of the trials that you are reviewing. That strict constructivism says that the Constitution is not an antique, out-of-date, 18th century, dead European white male slave owner document, but in fact has produced the longest free society in modern history, which we have, and that reflects the aspirations to freedom that come to us from the Hebrew and the Christian traditions, as well as the Athenian Greek and Roman Republic traditions. Through the Enlightenment, the idea that we have inalienable natural rights, among them are life, liberty, and property. These things still matter to strict constructivists. The thought that there are rights that come from a transcendent source beyond government was put there by our founders precisely so that a group of judicial activists or other self-appointed saviors, just so they wouldn't come along and take away certain rights in our all collective best interests. Because after all, the right to keep and bear arms, it can be a problematical one. The right to free choice might mean that you smoke, or you drink, or you fool around, or you take illegal drugs, or maybe you don't pay all your taxes, and maybe you do some work under the table, or maybe you gamble against the law, or whatever. If you really believe that you can make the world better by legislating it, you're going to find the freedoms given to us by our founding fathers a problem. And socialists do. Socialism and the U.S. Constitution are absolutely incompatible because socialism assumes that the collective has rights over property that the individual doesn't, and that therefore any individual property rights are only so long as the government permits and allows it. In other words, it's not really property at all. It's property on loan from the government. Strict constructivism as I understand it, means that whatever decisions that you make in a trial court or in an appellate court, whatever decisions that you make need to be expressing the spirit and the letter of the U.S. Constitution and the original intent of the founders, as revealed in that Constitution, in the Federalist Papers, and in other key documents that relate to the establishment of freedom here in this country under the Constitution. That is a different role. It is not a role for self-appointed saviors. It is not a role for people who see society as completely messed up with no chance of saving itself without the help of activist judges. And we are to the point where every time a strict constructivist is proposed to the U.S. Supreme Court, they have to undergo a gauntlet of personal attacks. It happened to Justice Clarence Thomas. It happened to Justice Brett Kavanaugh. It is not something that the right has done to the left. That may change, though, because since 1986-87, when President Reagan appointed a guy named Robert Bork to be a Supreme Court justice, the Democrats in the U.S. Senate have made the approval process that the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate in general into a political process that punishes strict constructivists because of the fear that if you have too many strict constructivists on the U.S. Supreme Court, that the Roe versus Wade decision in particular will be taken away. That interpretation is my best attempt to be objective. I remind you, I'm a conservative, and that is a conservative interpretation. I encourage you to talk to people in your life who are not conservatives and get their opinion. But it comes back to Roe v. Wade because, again, it was a decision made by judges, activist judges, not by politicians going through the normal legislative process. So there is a fragility to the whole underlying legitimacy of legal abortion in the United States because it rests on a Supreme Court decision, not on legislation that has gone through the bill stage, the debate stage in committee in the House, the debate stage in committee in the Senate, the votes on the House and Senate floor, the conference committee sending it to the president and having the president sign or veto it, and if he vetoes it, having the Congress override his veto. All of that requires the consent of the governed in the involvement of citizen action groups, and there is a genuine fear on the part of pro-abortion people that if Roe v. Wade were reversed, that legal abortion would be taken away, which I think is a lack of confidence in their argument. If they really believe that sane, civilized people would approve abortion on demand, they should be willing to go to the people and their representatives and go through the political process. But because it rests on a Supreme Court interpretation, an activist one, because strict constructivists might not go along with it, whatever their feelings on abortion, they might not go along with the Supreme Court decision making such a big change. The battle over who is on the federal judicial courts, the federal appeals courts, and the United States Supreme Court is intensified if you are a believer in the pro-choice position, because it all could be taken away, because it was all given. What the Supreme Court giveth, the Supreme Court taketh away, which is why our fundamental rights were said by the founders to be transcendent rights, given to us by God, because what God gives, man can't take away, not righteously. So there's the divide between strict constructivists and judicial activists.